I will move on to our today's meeting, which is something that is of particular interest to me as a doctor, as a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. I've had a lot of contact with people who have been traumatized through the war and had a shocking experience. But I was always very impressed by the strength of the Somali people and in the face of this extremely traumatic adversity which continues in some parts of Somalia still. So today's theme is to do with the strength, the resilience of the Somali people, focusing on women. This doesn't mean we discriminate men, but it just happens that today's lecture, we can't cover everything in one go. Is to do with women both in Somalia and the diaspora. And I'm delighted to introduce our learned speaker, Dr. Joanna Lewis, who is an associate professor in international history at the London School of Economics. And she has specialized in the history of encounters between Britain and Africa since the 19th century. She has a PhD from the Cambridge University, where she became a junior fellow at Churchill College. She has held lectureships at a number of universities, including SOAS, at Durham and LSE. She set up the first courses in the history of the British Empire and in African history. So she's very knowledgeable about these subjects. In January this year, her second monograph, The Empire of Sentiment, was published by Cambridge University Press, and you may be interested in reading that. Currently, Joanna is working at LSE on a research project which was funded by the Institute of Global Affairs, and is meant to investigate how refugees forced to flee from conflict from 1990 survived the trauma of dislocation, rebuilt or remade new lives in London, and then turned their attention to helping the homeland. So this will be the subject of her talk, and then of course we welcome questions and the usual lively discussion we get at these meetings. So I now hand over to Joanna.
Thank you very much, Eleni, and thank you all for being here this evening. Thank you for the kind introduction and the offer to speak before the very distinguished, hugely respected Anglo-Somali Society. It's a huge, huge honour and also slightly terrifying. This is especially the case because I'm quite new to the field of academic research into Somali studies and Anglo-Somali history, pre-colonial, colonial and post-colonial. And it's also a project that I should say is very much, if not in its infancy, then certainly in late adolescence, put it like that. It's a little bit unwieldy at the moment. But today represents a great opportunity to get your feedback and maybe even some offers to be interviewed at some later date. That would be absolutely fantastic. It's also a great opportunity to thank those members of the Anglo-Somali community that have already been so helpful to getting this research off the ground. There's quite a few to thank, but I won't mention them all, but particularly, and also another fellow historian, Mrs. Rhoda Ibrahim. So thanks to everybody. Already in this research, Mohammed and I have had the privilege of hearing many personal stories, and sometimes these stories are very emotional. We've been quite upset. Your tears have become our tears, and it's been a privilege to be part of this one of the most rewarding research experiences. Nevertheless, despite saying all that, I can imagine many of you are thinking it's slightly perplexing, if not somewhat annoying, to have a non-Somali history researching it. And I totally get as President Eleni Krani pointed out, I have made sure that African history is taught at LSE and that Somali history is also taught at LSE. I've also had the very good fortune to work with some extraordinarily gifted British Somali LSE undergraduates, most of whom have done dissertations with me. They've been all women. I don't know where the boys are. I'm going to mention Miss Salika Hassan, Miss Laden Mohammed, now a teacher in UAE, Miss Mohammed Hayat, who is in the civil service fast stream and was also shortlisted and went on the Muslim leadership program at Oxford University a few months ago. I'm delighted to see Miss Rama Mohammed in the audience. I know you hate me for picking on you, but you are here, and it's lovely to see you, who graduated last year. Well done. And currently we have a Miss Zainab Mollin, who's doing a master's at LSE, and I'm going to be trying to persuade her on Thursday to do a PhD starting next year, so we'll keep you posted. So at the moment then, although I know that the next generation, very, very soon, Africa in the UK will be taught by Africans, for the moment, as far as LSE International History is concerned, I'm afraid you're stuck with me. From time to time, and I want to go into the origin, no, I think I'll leave it for now. From time to time then, because I want to give you the background to this project, is that LSE gets money donated to allow scholars to research issues which are part of its motto. Its motto is to find the causes of things. So in 2016, is there a funny noise? Oh, it's okay. I thought it was something coming from here. No, it's fine. So in 2016, there was a call for proposals from academics in LSE to study the concept of resilience in a post-conflict setting. So bearing that in mind, and I was friends with a very distinguished British Somali historian at SOAS, Dr Shane Marotta, some of you may know of, an expert in urban history and social change. His PhD was, for those of you who are interested, on Berbera in the 19th century. It's one of the first studies of Egyptian Turco urban development. Anyway, we decided to put in a proposal to look at this extraordinary story, which he had decided ought to be told sooner rather than later as an urban historian, and that was the reconstruction of Hargeisa and the role of a diaspora in that reconstruction. So that's very much his side of the project, which is urban history and the growth of Hargeisa, how it's actually developed. And my side, because I've done more emotional histories of empire, cultural histories of empire, is I'm looking more at the emotional and cultural resilience of reconstruction after the Civil War erupted. So the focus then on mine has evolved somewhat to encompass actually the role of women and the resilience in this story of recovery after 1991. And although the focus still remains Hargeisa, because I'm interviewing women who are not from Hargeisa, although they've got very interesting other parts of Somaliland, also based in Mogadishu, where they've got humanitarian projects, I'm going to sort of cast my net slightly wider. And it's important, I think, to acknowledge that there's no single model in this story. There's a huge variety, and it's important to get that variety down on the page. I think it's easier for me to say at this point then what this study is not, in line with the principles of the Society. This is not a political project. There was no political motivation in the proposals, as I'm sure you already know, on the experience and challenges facing Somali men and Somali young men in particular in London. And I am working with Dr. Mohammed Hassan, who did his PhD on this subject at Goldsmiths, and helping him get that important work on male Somali youth published. However, as my initial research evolved, and that of Mr. Mohammed Ismail, I felt that the story that needed telling, the gap that was biggest, and that I was best equipped to tell that story because of my own experiences, related to Somali women and their experiences of resilience in diaspora, and particularly the stories of humanitarianism, how they have gone on to become humanitarians and also go back home and set up. And then active providers of that humanitarian assistance very quickly kicking into action, particularly in the context of wanting to help those that they've left behind, feeling absolutely traumatised that they've left people behind and they don't know how they're doing and they want to help. So in terms of the first category then, women as professionals who suddenly find themselves as refugees, I've interviewed some extraordinary women, stories that are beyond inspiring to someone like me. And a lot of their stories begins with this amazing book where, if you want to really get into this, and I'm sure many of you read it anyway, Somalia, The Untold Story, The War Through the Eyes of Somali Women, edited by Judith Gardner and Judy L. Bushra. This is a great start for learning about the degree in which war crimes were committed against women and girls, the experience of women as widows, as peacemakers, as peace builders. Somali women participated in the Transnational Assembly in Somalia, participated in the Puntland administration in demobilisation of the Day-Day. In Hargeisa, quickly set up was the Somaliland Women's Development Association and also Somaliland's Women's Organisation. Women quickly addressed the lack of basic facilities that were impacting on women's health and infant mortality, as well as quickly mobilising to push for more political rights and the participation of women in the wider civic society. One respondent said, quote, "I'm not brave, it's just that you have to live in this country and I'm determined to live here and to improve it." Another said, often when people returned, they found little that was left standing. So what I found in London is that we have a very influential, active group of professional Somali women who had been working in Somalia as professional women before the war started. They could be often working in secondary schools, in the education sector. I've heard many women talking about their excited work in health. Also, we have professional women in the 60s and 70s working in international organisations in development and humanitarianism. Some of these women have been educated, I think it's at the one British colonial school for girls. It's just unbelievable. Others had been educated, gone for further education in the UK or in Mogadishu or in Djibouti. Some had agitated, some had actually been involved in campaigning for
independence. And so there were in this generation great optimism and great expectation that they were to be leaders now of this independent country and they were to, make their mark. And we also have then women in this category working, as I said, within international organisations like the UN, WHO, for in development, having huge responsibilities, setting up regional programmes, being involved in humanitarian initiatives, running vast teams of people, huge responsibility, huge status, decent salary, suddenly in London, refugees, nothing, all that gone. So many found themselves without career, identity, and, as I said, this catastrophic loss of status. Some had, yes, they'd been used to living in London as part of their work occasionally, but they'd always stayed in central London in really nice hotels. I talked to some women who said when they were sent to West London, they didn't know this was London. They couldn't understand the Cockney accent. They thought, where is this? Is this really London? Are these people really speaking English? So it wasn't their London at all. They were used to a completely different London. So they pulled together friendship groups, they worked together, there's a tremendous mobilisation. This Oxford House has a huge part in this story. Some decided to return to the region as part of this first wave of international assistance. I've had stories of some who were imprisoned, psychologically tortured, some who had to flee and come back to the UK, some who stayed as rebuilders. One woman I interviewed went back to Hargeisa and was told to do her work she needed to go to the Ministry of Water. So she went to this one building that was standing, and inside was one pump and two women that were doing some washing. And that was the ministry when she went back. And so she had to navigate around that. And then some also then stayed in the UK and began to deal with the deluge then of refugees, particularly refugee women, who were coming back. Often they started to work in education. I've heard stories of Somali women being thrown in schools and teachers just treating them as if they were special needs students. That is the kind of, how does a mother negotiate that? And that's the second category then, women as mothers, who came here, maybe their partner was fighting, a husband fighting in the SNM, or they were bereaved or widowed, and they had children or an elderly parent. And sometimes those witnesses of violence who are more vulnerable to the stress and trauma also started to exhibit signs of stress. So this was all new territory. So we have women then coming to London in the early 90s. They're put in a hotel and they're given some money and they're thinking, well, I don't speak the language, what is this money, what? And they just stay in their hotels for days until somebody finds them, hears the children crying and goes to help them. And it's the memory of that that really seems to play on in people's nightmares. I've also heard some very moving stories about young girls, adolescents, 5 or 6, caught up in the war with terribly traumatic memories, who find themselves as observers, sort of listening at the keyhole, trying to work out, are we going to have to leave? What's going on? Why is that? Where is that horrible noise coming from? Desperately trying to find out what's going on. I heard such a moving story from one woman who was 6 when their family had to leave overnight. She remembers vividly for days and days just holding on to her favourite dress, which she had tucked into her arm, and she wouldn't let it go. She wouldn't let it go. She kept holding onto it. And then after one particular moment of conflict when they had to run, this was in the desert, can you imagine her heartbreak when she looked down and found that the dress was gone? And it's the memory of that keeps playing back. Another young woman remembered being with the nomads in the desert and playing with her siblings and saw a plane coming from the distance. And so naturally they thought, they've come to save us. They've come to save us. And they were waving, only to find then when they ran back to the village that the first plane was to spot you, she said, and then the second plane was to shoot you. And the guilt that they always feel, that they brought attention to their village fleeing, but they were just 6 or 7. What did they know? So there's a huge amount then of resilience in this initial phase of surviving trauma and pushing back those memories of trauma and of initial displacement. So that's my first phase. The second phase then is resilience as recovery. And yes, I've covered that, sorry. Is resilience as recovery. And I'm not going to say too much because time is going on, but again, what we have here then is we have those categories in terms of the adult women getting involved very quickly in support for refugees, advocacy, in sort of helping settling down, humanitarian support for what's happening back home, fundraising, setting up advice forums, councils, that comes a bit later. And also we see then the importance of cultural gatherings, of poetry, of reading books that have been written now in Britain to help people connect with their culture. So we see a lot of emergency humanitarian support that women are gathering with fundraising, and new organisations are being set up, particularly to support women. And then finally, the third phase is resistance as rebuilding, which of course it's a continual narrative from what I've been talking about, but it really sort of kicks in with this notion of half London, half home. How can we really now put our communities back on their feet? And how can we also help with what's happening at home? So we have now examples of women setting up organisations and going back to Hargeisa and working. For example, I just interviewed this afternoon Farah Jerde of the Farah Foundation, who is currently helping to run 7 public schools in Hargeisa for girls. Previous to that, we've seen lots of Somali women setting up or working with local NGOs back in Somaliland, working with those NGOs that were specifically set up, like Nagard, for sort of women-only projects. We also see women establishing humanitarian projects, particularly where European Western NGOs have gone into Somaliland or Somalia, but then have pulled out, or they're only on short-term contracts. Then you've got people stepping in and saying, right, we can do this, and we're going to do it our own way. So we've seen a lot of that. And then finally, this volunteering, which is really amazing and inspiring. As Farah Jerde said earlier, this is what she's most excited about now, is this next generation, how they feel that they have a duty, responsibility, a religious feeling to try and do something more. They've been told about the conflict from their parents and they want to give something back. They also are using it, humanitarian work, as a way of testing out what is it like going back as a young woman that's grown up, say in Ealing, Haringey. What's it like going back to Somaliland? So many use voluntary work, humanitarianism, as a way of ticking lots of boxes, helping, trying to do something, and also seeing, you know, if they could go back permanently. So we've got very many categories. This is Penna, which, thanks to Rhoda, I went to visit. This is their headquarters. And we've got some amazing examples in London, and this is a story that we really want to try and pinpoint and hone in on, is the institutional histories of these path-breaking organisations, like the Islington Somali Community Organisation, SAFI, of course, Council of Somali Organisations, Lamiga, that there are others. And so the last part of the book then, as I've said, is about the resilience, the rebuilding of areas within Somaliland, in particularly Hargeisa, of you know, how there's been so much transformation and there's so much life and it's so dynamic there. Yeah, so I'm using animals here, by the way, because LSE operates a very tight control of ethics. So you have to ask people if they want their photo taken, and then you have to ask them permission if they want to be included in your presentation. So I asked the donkeys and I asked the goats and camels, and they're fine with it. So I hope you understand that I've respected them fully. And then that's an illustration of Nagard, who I interviewed. I couldn't finish on this, it's the last one, is volunteering. So it's this is a very rough outline then of the structure of what I hope will be, or what will be a book, published on this extraordinarily important case study of recent resilience. There are lots of gaps, there's more stories to be told, and if you want to participate, that would be fantastic. If you want to tell stories about raising money, the service you ran, and that also when you perhaps didn't feel so resilient, and how you managed to get through it, and what you've maybe been doing in Hargeisa. It's been incredibly inspiring for me already to see just how much women have had to cope with and had to be resilient. Even if I always hear stories about, well, we're nomads, you know, we're nomadic women, we're strong. Nevertheless, no previous history of civil war, of state collapse, no models to follow. Being refugees, you know, in London from the 90s onwards, having to walk new paths, having to travel roads that were not yet made, carrying out new roles and forging new identities. And I think it's all been done with so much dignity, humanity and style. And I really think it's a story that the world needs to know more about. Thank you.